make one remark about the idea of korech. We eat the matzah, we eat the maror, and then we make a sandwich, and we say this is in memory of or a memorial to the temple, as Hillel did the mitzvah. This is what Hillel did in those times, the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. He would gather together matzah and the maror and eat them together, to fulfill the verse that you should eat the Paschal sacrifice on or together with matzos and marorim. That's what he understood. He understood to eat it as a sandwich. Now, my Rabbi Zatzal taught this, and he actually wrote it, was published in an article. There are two different concepts that we have to distinguish. We're in touch with history. A great deal of the Torah is reliving the history of the Jewish people. And concerning the temple, there are two different phrases which really describe two different categories of relating to the temple. One is Zecher l'Churban, which is memory of the destruction, and the other is Zecher l'Mikdash, memory or commemoration of the temple. Now, since the temple is destroyed, you might think it's just variation in words, but it isn't. It's a gigantic difference. Zecher l'Churban, the commemoration of the destruction, is a kind of mourning. One feels the pain of the fact that the temple is destroyed. That's what happens on Tisha B'Av. That's what happens on the other, the whole of the 3 weeks. If you're Ashkenazi and if you're Sephardi, it's 9 days. And the other fasts during the year, all except perhaps one. Zecher l'Mikdash is an entirely different idea. When the Haggadah says we are doing what Hillel did in the temple, and it says Zecher l'Mikdash, we are not introducing an element of mourning into the performance of the Seder. That's not what's going on. The other half of it is that what the temple stands for, its reality, is not totally destroyed. There is a reality of the temple still with us, and we do certain things out of a connection with that continuing reality. And that's an as if it were here performance. And that's what's going on in the Haggadah. We're not mourning over the destruction. We are doing something which we can do because there's something left of the temple to still relate to. There are other things that we do in the same way, in a certain sense, as Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai established. When we take the lulav on Sukkot for 6 days, we don't do it on Shabbos, but we do it for the whole week. That's very strange, because the Torah's mitzvah is everywhere in the world only one day, only the first day. The 7 days was only in the temple. Yochanan Zakkai instituted that Zecher Mikdash, that everybody everywhere should do it 7 days except for Shabbos. That's not mourning over the destruction. That's a commemoration of the reality of the temple, which is still with us. So that's what happened here. That's what's going on here. Korech is connecting to that present reality rather than thinking of it as a...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
When we wash our hands before eating bread, is that to remember, or is that is that like mourning, or is that because like the temple's still with us?
I don't think it's either. I don't think that it's defined in our sources as Zecher l'Mikdash or Zecher l'Churban.
Okay.
That was instituted during temple times.
Okay.
That was to remind the Kohanim that they might be tamei and they shouldn't eat truma.
Okay.
And they felt it wouldn't last if it wasn't the whole of the Jewish people who do it. Or some associate it with cleanliness, but I don't think it's ever defined or described as a Zecher l'Mikdash or a Zecher l'Churban, either one. Not everything we do that was done in temple times is a memory of the temple. I mean, that's the general rule. Hashem has always been mindful of us, and He will bless us. He'll bless the house of Israel, house of Aaron. He'll bless those who fear Hashem, both small and great. Now, I must tell you, that's not the literal translation, though every translation I've seen takes it that way, but the literal translation is the small together with the great. Ktanim im hagadolim. It doesn't say biyachad, and it doesn't say v. It just says with. And if A is with B, it doesn't follow that B is with A. A can be following B, and B is not following A. Here it's the small together with the great. And this illustrates a general idea that you can benefit by associating with great people. And there's a double benefit. Number one, you could be elevated. You can be driven to perform better because you're connected to great people. And also, since God favors these great people, you can benefit from that favor if you're connected to them. Because once you're connected to them, especially if they care about you, so then when God calculates what he's doing with respect to you, God has to make a double calculation. How are you going to take it? And how is this great person that you're connected to going to take it? And you can thereby get protection from other things that might go wrong. So I think it's very important that that it says here together with the Boston Rabbi of Harnov illustrated this idea in, I think, a very beautiful and logical way. The Torah tells us when the Jewish people left Egypt, before they got to Sinai, there was an attack. The Amalekites attacked. There was a battle. And Moses told Joshua to choose an army, go out to fight. And Moses went up on a mountain where the people could see him. And he went up with Aaron, his brother, and Hur's brother-in-law. And he was up there on the mountain. When he raised his hands, the Jewish forces were successful. And when he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were successful. And it was hard for him to hold his hands up, so they took a stone. He sat down on a stone, and the two of them stood on one on either side, Aaron and Hur, and they held his arms up until nightfall, and they succeeded in weakening the Amalekites. Now, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, don't think that we're talking about magic here. Moses raised his hands, so they're victorious. Their hands go down, the others are victorious. No, when Moses raised his hands, the Jewish people dedicated themselves to God, and through that dedication, they were victorious. And when he lowered his hands, they lost that dedication, and then the Amalekites were victorious. So Meir Horowitz, the Boston Rabbi of Harnov, asked the following simple question. You're talking about Jewish soldiers, okay? When the hands go up, they dedicate themselves to God and they're victorious, and vice versa when the hands go down. Can't they figure it out? They're not superstitious. They don't think it's Moses' hands going up and down. They know it's their dedication to God that's doing it. Okay, if that's true, then even when Moses' hands go down, let them dedicate themselves to God and be victorious. What's the implication? That when Moses' hands go down, you can't dedicate yourself to God. You need the inspiration of Moses to enable you to be able to do that. Your credit is that you're smart enough to attach yourself to Moses. And that's a credit. Sometimes ego stands in the way of that. There could be a struggle. But without Moses' inspiration, they're not able to do it. That's a general Jewish theme. It's one thing that the Hasidic movement took over in great detail. And there are lots of evidence for it. And here, I think, in the strict phraseology here, you definitely have that. Now, I want to tell you a story that actually occurred, and then I'll illustrate it for you on the next page. This goes back about, I guess, 120 years, 130 years. In Europe, whoever was the Ger Rebbe at that time said to his followers, this was around Rosh Hashanah time, he said, whoever will say Hallel on Sukkot and have in mind what he needs, when we say the words, please Hashem, if he'll have in mind what he needs, I promise him he'll get what he needs. The Rebbe promised. So you can imagine how that year in Sukkot, the roof was shaking. Several months later, two of the elder Hasidim were talking, and one said to the other, you know, I have a tremendous confession to make. I'm sure that I had the idea of what I need in mind when I said, please Hashem, but it didn't happen. And the other one said, I have to confess the same thing. It didn't happen to me either. Now, you didn't typically go and ask the Ger Rebbe your question because you could get a slap in the face. Ger was an inheritor of Kutsk, because Kutsk was very tough. But you could go to the Gabbai, and he might know. So they went to the Gabbai, and they said to him, look, the Rebbe promised, and didn't seem that it happens. So the Gabbai said to them, really, you had in mind what you needed when you said, please Hashem. Just glance at page 44, the very bottom of the page. You see this set of short lines? Each one begins with Ana Hashem, please Hashem. So they said, what the Rebbe said, have in mind, please, when you say Ana Hashem, please Hashem. Ana Hashem, Hoshiano, Ana Hashem, Atzlichano, said the Gabbai. That's not the verse that the Rebbe was referencing. It's not that verse. Look back at page 42. Ana Hashem ki ani avdecha. Please Hashem, for I am your servant. That's the verse that the Rebbe meant. What's the difference? Because at the end of Hallel, please Hashem, save now. Please Hashem, make us successful now. That's asking, please give me. The Rebbe didn't promise if you ask God and say, please give me, he'll give it to you. But here it says, please Hashem, for I'm your servant, which means I'm only asking for what I can use to serve you. If that's the spirit in which you're asking, he said, then he'll give it to you. And you were supposed to figure that out yourself, that's the Ana Hashem that he meant, not the one at the end. That's typical of Ger and Kutsk. You have to be intelligent, think it out, go to the depths of things. And it is a very deep insight to the nature of prayer, that the petitions that we ask for should be asking for things which will enable us to serve God better, because that's what we ought to value. That's what we ought to feel is important, is significant, the ability to serve God. Nothing else is really valuable. So that's what we should be asking for. When you get to bottom of page 44, here I'm going to tell you something which is my own idea, so I can't guarantee that it's correct, but I think it's correct. This is the high point of Hallel, right before the end. And it has two verses. Each one is said twice. Please Hashem, save now. Please Hashem, make us successful now. Question is, are they equal, or is one more central than the other? Very often you have a gifted chazan, and he's singing with great enthusiasm. He gets to please Hashem, save now. He's at the top. And please Hashem, make successful now was down a step, like secondary. But I think it's the other way around. I think that the fundamental one is the second one, not the first one. Let's compare the ideas. Save me. Save me means I'm drowning. I'm drowning. I'm lost. If you don't save me, I'm lost. What does make me successful mean? Means I'm working, I'm functioning, I'm operating, but I know I can't do it alone. So I'm asking you to crown my efforts with success. Now, what are we put in the world to do? Are we put in the world to drown and God should save us? That's not what we're put here for. Of course it happens. It happens. And it's genuine, and a person should ask for salvation under those conditions. But that's not what we're put here for. We're put here to work and to recognize that we can't do it on our own and ask God for help and salvation. I think Ana Hashem Hatzlichano is the more important of the two. It's really the high point. Similarly, in the first blessing of the Shemona Esrei, at the end of the blessing, we describe God with three terms. Mogain, Ozer, Mashiach, Mogain. Ozer, Mashiach, Mogain. He helps, he saves, and he's a shield. Those are in order of increasing involvement. Helps means what I said before. I'm doing, I'm functioning, I have a project, I'm working on it, but I can't do it alone, and he helps. Moshe means he saves me, means I'm lost. I'm drowning, he saves me. Mogen goes even further. Mogen means I don't even get into trouble. A mogen is a shield. The challenges or the dangers don't even reach me. So that's an order of increasing involvement. And I think only the first is ideal. The first word God is described as helper, that's ideal. The other two are what I need in order to survive, but that's not the ideal. The ideal is that I should be functioning and he should be helping me succeed.
If Hatzlicha now is the more important one, why is it not the one that comes before Hoshia now?
Why can't it be an ascending? You ask about the Shemona Esrei, it'll depend. Lists have different meanings in different contexts. And one doesn't presume that they'll all be treated in the same way. I'll give you an example which is really very striking. There's a midrash that says, depending upon how a person behaves, that's how you refer to him, how you describe him, and how you treat him. If a person behaves well, then we say to him, you know that people were created last. That's because God wanted the whole of the creation to be prepared, and when man came on the scene, everything was prepared and ready for him. If he doesn't behave well, then we say to the person, man was created last, even after the mosquitoes. Even after the mosquitoes, they're created. So that's great. So what is best, to be last on the list or not to be last on the list? Depends on what kind of list it is. There, the Midrash is contrasting two different types of lists. One is a list of means to ends. So he says, what are you going to do about the problem? Well, first I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. With those two, I'm going to get that, and then I'll finally do that. What's the most important item on the list? The last one. The last one is the one that's going to solve the problem. The rest of it is means to ends. On the other hand, if you have a list of things to do, it's very common to put the most important thing first and put them in decreasing order, and then you'll go down the list. As far as you get, you'll get. This is precisely what the Midrash is saying. By the way a human being lives, he can determine for him what kind of list it is. Was the whole of the creation a means for the sake of what he can do with his life? Or is it a disconnected list of items and he's last on the list and therefore least important? If you deserve it, you say you're last and the whole world is created to be prepared for you. If you don't deserve it, then you say even the mosquito preceded you. So there are different types of lists, and the different types of lists will have different types of orders. And the fact that in the Shemona Esrei, it goes from our point of view, the best down, but there it's describing Hashem's activity. And it's going from least to most. And here I'm asking, I ask for the most important thing at the end because the previous one is a means. Being saved is a means to being able to function. I'll give you another example of it. When Avraham and Sarah go down to Egypt, and Avraham realizes there's going to be danger, so he says to Sarah, please say that you're my sister, so that they will treat me well for your sake, and I will live on account of you. Now there too, if you thought it was a list of two separate items he's asking for, the order would be very, very strange. Say you're my sister, so they'll treat me well. Let's see, that was one thing. And then there was another thing. Let me focus on, I'll remember. Oh yes, and I'll survive. Very funny to put survival after being treated well. But if the idea is that if we say we're husband and wife, they're going to kill me and take you. But if we say we're brother and sister, then they are going to try to convince me to voluntarily agree that you should marry somebody. And they're going to try to bribe me to do that. They will treat me well for your sake, and that's how I'll stay alive. Then it makes perfect sense. Because the first one is a means to the second one. Doesn't mean it's less important. So it's all dependent on whether you think of it as disconnected items or whether you think of it as a means to an end. It's a means to an end, so then you understand why the less important one comes first, because it's only a means. And we come on page 53 to the conclusion of the Seder. It's the last element in the Seder where we celebrate the fact and give thanks for the fact that we're able to carry out the Seder as we should. And we ask that we should be able next year to perform it in Jerusalem, because what we do is fractured.
Is this after the meal?
Long after the meal. No. Because the Hallel that we said, that I was just talking about, is after the meal also.
So this is still considered part of the
Seder.
story. It's part of the Seder, but not part of the story. Or anything.
It's certainly considered part of the Seder. The Seder has 15 elements.
Right.
I think that's true.
I'm just asking.
It's good to ask. It's good to ask. What happens is the telling of the story is over when you get to the meal. And then what you do after the meal immediately is you finish Hallel. Now Hallel, after the meal, branches out. The first 2 paragraphs of Hallel are about the Exodus from Egypt, really. The second one is all about the Exodus from Egypt. After that, it branches out to God's care and salvation throughout history and our beseeching God for closeness and relationship. It's the finishing of Hallel, but Hallel itself starts with a recognition of Egypt and then branches out to a much broader perspective. And then the section from the Siddur that we say after that is not focused particularly on Egypt at all.
Which section is that?
Okay, so it's first of all one of the Psalms, Hodel Hashem Ki Tov. This is on page 45.
That's not usually in Hallel, is it?
Correct.
Right.
It has the phraseology in Chazal is called Hallel HaGodel,
Right.
but it's not part of officially Hallel. It's a separate psalm. Yes, as one of the psalms we say Shabbos morning, right? Just as one of the many psalms. Here's put in because of its praise and thanksgiving to God, which is exquisite. And then comes Nishmas, like you say, on every Shabbos and holiday morning. Then after that, and then you go continuing on from Nishmas the way you would on a Shabbos or holiday morning, all the way up to Yishtabach. And then it depends. Some end just by ending Yishtabach, and others end by going back to the closing paragraph of Hallel and put it at the end there. So you come to that end is very interesting. Okay, so you see, as I said, the first 2 paragraphs in Hallel, the first paragraph is general, the second paragraph is all about Egypt. Then you have the whole meal. Then you pick up Hallel again. Hallel, from there on out, is very general, talks about God's salvation at all times, and our relationship with God at all times, and petitions for being close to God at all times. Then you pick up with Hallel HaGodel, which refers to Egypt and continuous and all of them. Then you pick up with Nishmas. Nishmas is exalting God as the one who's in the soul, and the yearning for God and all the rest. Then you go through what you say every Shabbos and holiday morning, all the way up to the end of Yishtabach, all of which has nothing particular to do with Egypt. Now the question is, how do you close? So the Ashkenazi versions, they close that way and finish. So you've left Egypt behind, and you've branched out into weekly, holiday praises of God. The Sephardi version is to end with the closing paragraph of Hallel, which means you go back to the more local picture. You don't stay with the general picture. You subsume the more general picture together more with the local picture. Okay, 2 different ways of doing it. And then you drink the 4th cup of wine, and then you come to Nirtzah. And it's an expression of the fact that Hakadosh Baruch Hu has accepted what you have done, what you have accomplished in serving Him in this way. Now, after that, there are various poetical political items which are sung, and really the way the mitzvah is done is, it depends about who you are and what level you're up to, but the way it's done by some exalted people is just to keep on with these poems and singing, and then some say all of the Song of Songs, which we do, and if you're still awake, then to read midrashim or continue discussion until you just fall asleep. Shir Hashem, right? Until you just fall asleep. You fall asleep over the activity of the Haggadah. Although most of us aren't that strong. We do actually climb into bed at 3 o'clock or 3:30. But that's the idea. The idea is to keep it going. One symptom of this is what we say to the wise son, which I didn't explain when we were there. What does the Chacham say? What are these testimonies and laws and statutes that Hashem, our God, commanded you? And you should even tell him, according to the laws of Pesach, that you don't eat anything after the afikoman. You don't eat anything after the afikoman. Afikoman refers to the very last item in the meal. In the temple, it was the Paschal sacrifice. The Paschal sacrifice was eaten al hasova. It was the final piece of food which made you satisfied. Very last thing. Today, when we don't have a Paschal sacrifice, we eat matzah at the end. That's our substitute for the missing Paschal sacrifice. Now, what's the idea? Don't eat anything afterwards. Why?
You want the taste of matzah to remain in your mouth.
Exactly. You want the taste of matzah to remain in your mouth. This goes on till the morning. Till the morning. And I think you can appreciate now how it works, because we do drink a cup of wine after this. So but is it really going to remain in your mouth? But if it's meat together with juices and fat, that will survive the cup of wine, and you'll still taste it until the morning. Right? What does the idea of tasting until the morning mean? It means that the whole night is part of this performance. Even though you finish the official Seder at Nirtzah, but the whole night is part of the performance. Once the morning breaks, have a cup of coffee. No problem. You don't need to taste it. So the idea of continuing the recital and the singing and the discussions and meditations until you fall asleep is a very appropriate idea. And that's one of the reasons why the end of the Haggadah has attracted these extra items, because of that concept. Okay? Okay, now let's just take a look. We count the numbers 1 to 13, and we describe something that the numbers refer to. Let's just take a look at the list. 1 is, surprise, surprise, the Creator, Kadosh Baruch Hu. 2 is the 2 tablets of the covenant. 3 is the patriarchs. 4 is the matriarchs. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I don't know whether you were there or not, but there are a lot of 4s in the Haggadah. The 4s, say the Gaon of Vilna, are a reference to the matriarchs. 4 cups, 4 questions, 4 sons. They're a reference to the matriarchs. 5 is the 5 books of the Torah, of the Chumash. 6 is the Mishnah, so you have the written law and the oral law. 7 is the days of the week, fundamental unit of time. 8 is Milah, Bris Milah. The Maharal says that the number 8 is absolutely fundamental because our world is built on 7. 7 days of the week and 7 weeks in the sabbatical cycle and 7 days of Pesach. Yeah, if you live in Chutz La'aretz, you have 8. That's because you're living in the wrong place. 7 days of Sukkot. 7 is the picture of our world. And by the way, there are 3 patriarchs and 4 matriarchs. That's not an accident. There's 7 there also. And in terms of Kabbalah, 7 is a very important number about describing how our world works. What is 8? 8 is something outside of our world which inserts itself in. Because above 7 there's 10. 10 has an extra 3. Those extra 3 are somewhat disconnected from our world. From time to time, they insert themselves in to have an impact. That's what 8 is. So it's very important that 7 here is 7 days of the week, and 8 is a step beyond. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Why don't we count Bilhah and Zilpah as matriarchs?
It's very interesting. The reason is because every time it mentions one of them giving birth, it says Shifchas Rachel and Shifchas Leah. They function only as extensions of Rachel and Leah. And the text is quite clear about it. Every time they give birth, they say Shifchas Leah and Shifchas Rachel. They're only functioning. That's how Rachel, when her shifcha starts giving birth, could say, God has judgment, God has found favor with me and everything else. What do you mean? It's somebody else. No. It represents me. Yeah.
I've also heard that the 4 cups represent the 4 levels of redemption.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'll show you.
Does it also relate to the matriarchs?
Yes.
Those levels of...
Yes, I think that's right. Good. Because Chazal say, B'schus noshim tzidkonius nigalu avosenu b'Mitzrayim. It's because of the merit of the righteous women that we were saved from Egypt. So there definitely would be a connection there. 9 is the months of pregnancy. How that fits in here, what we're being told is reproduction is somehow a fundamental feature of how the world works. I can't explain it, but that's the message. 10 is the 10 pronouncements at Sinai. 11 is the 11 stars. Which 11 stars? The 11 stars that Joseph saw in his dream when the sun and the moon and the stars bowed down to him. That was his father, his mother, and the 11 brothers. And that was absolutely fundamental in the development of the Jewish people. 12 is the 12 tribes, and 13 are the 13 midos, as we say, midos of Rachamim, the characteristics, God's characteristics of mercy. Even though not everybody has the phrase that way, Rambam doesn't have the phrase that way, but that's so. I think the only mystery here is the 9 months of pregnancy, which don't seem to be on the same level of being fundamental as the rest, but that means there's a secret that's being hidden from us. Then the final one, Chad Gad Yah, the goat that was bought. This is a series of interactions where each level outdoes the previous level, and it gives a picture of the topsy-turvy nature of history, where this is ascendant and that is ascendant. This succeeds for a time, then is beaten by something else. And at the very end is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will destroy the angel of death, and it will lead to the permanent redemption. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am Hashem, and I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. I shall rescue you from their service. I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm with great judgments. I shall take you to me for a people. I shall be a God unto you. Those are the 4 Lashonos of Geula, the 4 languages of redemption. Now, the truth is, verse 8 says, I shall bring you to the land. That could be counted by some as a 5th language, and some want to say that the Kosher Elio, the cup of Elijah, refers to that language. Now let's look at them again and try to figure out how the contents are related. Again, beginning with verse 6. I am Hashem, and I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. Hotsesi, I'll remove you, take you out. Mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. Then it says, I shall rescue you from their service. Then it says, I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm with great judgments. So even if I stop there, what's the first one? The first one was, I shall take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. The second is, I'll rescue you from their service. It means I'm going to take you out from under the burdens before I rescue you from their service. Excuse me, if we're still serving them, what do you mean that you've been taken out from under the burdens of Egypt? Right? And even more striking, if we continue on 8, I shall bring you to the land which I raised my hand to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 6 starts, I shall take you out from the burdens. I shall rescue you, I shall redeem you. And we asked, if I'm taking you out from under the burdens before I rescue you, what does it mean? Good. 7, I shall take you from you as a people, I shall be a God to you, and you shall know that I am Hashem your God who takes you out from under the burdens of Egypt. That was number 1. After I do all 4, you'll know I did number 1. Very, very funny. says the Nesiv Shalom, number one refers to recovering an independent Jewish identity. Who am I? Got to the point where in Egypt, the vast majority of people, if you ask them, who are you? The answer would be, I am an Egyptian slave. I am an Egyptian slave. That's what I am. None. I'm a Jew, essentially a servant of the Creator, free by nature, who temporary circumstances have caused me to have to work for this job. No, I'm an Egyptian slave. That has to be broken. That's the first step in liberation. The first step in liberation is to change the person's identity. So God says, the first thing I got to do is change your identity. You'll define yourself differently. Then step by step, I will break the physical bondage, and I will redeem you, and I'll take you to myself as a people. And then when you finally get to the point where I take you to myself as a people, then that identity that I'm investing in you will be completely formed, and then you'll know that it is I who took you out. It wasn't chance events that broke the Egyptian. The Egyptian economy didn't fail. The Egyptian military didn't fail. But I, who changed your attitude, I was the one who engineered the entire process. But what the verse is emphasizing is being taken out from under. I mean, what are you talking about being under the burdens? Well, you're not under burdens. Burdens aren't 6 feet tall and you're 5 feet tall. Under means you're and by the way, burden in English is something you carry. Sivlos is in Egypt, in Hebrew, is really suffering. But you're weighed down by the suffering. You're crushed by the suffering. These are the words we use. But these words aren't words describing the intensity of the pain. These are words for the psychological effect of the pain. You have no real independent identity. You have no link with your past. You have no sense of the great exalted values that you represent. Just you're a slave. By the way, this is what the Nazis tried to do to the Jews in the concentration camps. It wasn't enough that they killed Jews. They did everything they could to break their spirit. They would starve them and then throw food on the ground. And if you had Jews who lost control and they would fight over the food, then the Nazis would comfort themselves. You see, they're animals. They're animals, so we're just killing animals. That's how they tried to solve their consciences. That's what was lost, and that's what was recovered. And many Jews, in particular, I will say this, religious Jews in particular, resisted that. There were religious Jews, when they got their ration of water to drink for the day, they used half of it to wash their hands. And they didn't survive less. Because a great contribution to survival is spirit. And when you use, instead of drinking down every drop and licking the bottom of the pail and looking around for anybody else's spare drops of water, that mental attitude is a mental attitude that's bad for survival. So that's what the Nazis tried to do. And this is what the Torah is telling us. The very first thing that God did was to enable us to disengage ourselves from that slave mentality.